Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to see you this Sunday morning. Glad to have you in on this study. We're going to be covering Hebrews chapter 13 today, so go ahead and pull out your Bibles and your devices, and we'll get into the study. Well, this will be our last week on the book of Hebrews. Next week, Les Keel will be in here, and he'll be talking about the book of Judges, so be ready for that. He's real excited and is going to be totally prepared, and I'm confident that he'll do a fantastic job. Before we jump into chapter 13, I wanted us to look back real quickly at the end of chapter 12. The author does a great job as part of his evidence building study. He does a lot of comparisons. And so we see at the end of chapter 12 a big comparison, a comparison between Mount Zion and Mount Sinai. And he asks the same question that we've kind of been asking for a long time now. Which one would you rather prefer? And so he starts discussing what Mount Zion looks like. Mount Zion is a place of hope and a place of joy and a place of glory. Sanctification is there. It's a place that Jesus has drawn you near to. Remember, we've been talking about that now for a couple of weeks. It draws us near to God. That's Mount Zion. Woo! Awesome! Or, on the other hand, you got Mount Sinai. Now, as the author puts it, that's a place of gloom, of fear, of trembling, right? So here's the comparison, the same question that we've kind of been asking for a while. Why would you turn from Mount Zion and start thinking about Mount Sinai? Zion is awesome and it's great and that's where God is. So why would you turn back and go back to all those other things? And so he leaves chapter 12. Actually, he kind of, the way I see it, he kind of finishes the book of Hebrews right there. That's what I kind of think. Because when we come to chapter 13, it seems like it's a whole different ball game. In fact, I've really wrestled with chapter 13 probably more than any other chapter about how to address it and what to do with it. The tone completely changes right here in chapter 13. We see instructional, teaching. Even when we start getting to the application part of the last couple of chapters, he's still got the same kind of tone. But when we come to chapter 13, in my language, because I've done some preaching, I think he starts preaching it. He just starts laying it out there. And so the tone completely changes. And so I want you to kind of see that. He does a lot of symbolism. He continues his contrast, and so we'll see that here in the text. There's been a question that the author has been trying to address, and it's the question of doubt. Why are you doubting? Why are you turning away from what you first had? Why would you go back? And so the whole book he's been trying to answer this question of doubt. And I believe in these first 9-10 verses, he tries to finally, in the end, kind of wrap it up, kind of summing it up, finally and completely say, hey, look, let me answer this question of doubt. And so what I want us to take a look at and consider here, first of all, is what causes us to turn away from Christ. And he tries to answer that. The author of Hebrews tries to answer that. So one of the first things he does is he says people begin to turn away from Christ because they forget. They forget. So the natural thing to not forget is to do what? Well, it's to remember. Remember. And so in these first few verses, he just starts saying, hey, let's remember some things. Let's remember who we are. Let's remember our spiritual character, our spiritual nature, right? And so he says, remember to be an active Christ follower. That's the first thing he says. We talked a little bit about this last week in our application, being a servant. What that does, it keeps God in the forefront of our minds. It gives us a purpose. It gives us a goal. He wants us to help others and to have them reach their goal as well. Another thing that he asks us to remember, he says that I want you to remember when you first became a Christ follower, when you were first baptized. Do you remember? Several weeks ago I said, hey, at any time do we need to stop and we need to think and we need to wrestle. This is another one of those times where it would be beneficial if we just stopped for a moment and we just thought, let me see if I can recall when I was baptized. Let me see if I can recall the situation going on around my baptism, about why I did it, where it was, how I felt before, how I felt afterwards. And I think the author here is saying, hey, I want you to remember when this whole thing started, right? I think that'll help you to not forget. You remember what was going on? For some of you, it may have been something pretty significant. Some real big issue may have been going on that needed to be resolved, and baptism was the answer to that question. For some of us, you may have just been curious, what is this God thing? What is this thing about Jesus? And you begin slowly studying, and finally you came to the conclusion, I'm just going to follow what it says, and you decided to be baptized. Do you remember coming up out of the water and that feeling of peace that you can finally relax? That's the way I felt. That all my sins were taken care of and that God was going to take care of me from here on. Even I was about 12, 13 years old when I was baptized, and even in my youth, it was still a seriously significant moment in my life. And I remember that feeling even all these years later. And I often look back on that moment and bank on that moment of, yes, Lord, that same thing that you had back then, the same relationship we had then, we've still got it now, today. It's still there. That same forgiveness, that same peace is still there today. Do you remember yours? Take just a moment and think about that. One of the things the author is saying, remembering that, remembering where we came from, remembering how this started, helps to keep us on track, helps to keep us focused and not turning from one way to the other. The author also says that I want you to remember that Jesus never changes. Now this is linked exactly to the one that I just talked about before. Jesus never changes. One of the points the author's been making along the way is Jesus offers something that nobody else offers. Sanctification, this cleansing that helps us to draw near to God, this forgiveness of sins. It's that same Jesus. Way back then, He's the same today. The author is almost, the way I see it, almost really making a challenge here. Jesus is the same today. If Jesus has not changed, the same forgiveness, then who has changed? Do you see the challenge there that he's giving to this Hebrew church? If Jesus hasn't changed, who's been changing? The people have. They've been turning. They've been looking from side to side, investigating other things. And so he wants them to get it. Remember that Jesus has not changed. What He offers has never changed. Hold on to Him then. Don't let go of Him then, right? So one of the things he says for us to not turn away, that helps us not turn away, is to remember it. There's another thing that he addresses here, why people turn away. Maybe you've thought this, that it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What I do is not making a difference. Whether I commit my life or stay focused or read my Bible or pray or serve, it just doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference. I'll confess to you right now, I've thought that before. Have you? Wondering if is it worth it? Is it worth it? I believe this tactic is from Satan. I believe he throws in this idea of doubt. Causes us to start turning from one place to another, looking for other things, considering where our real value is. And wouldn't you know it, the Hebrew writer's talking about it. So Satan's been using this tactic for years and years and years and years. He wants us to derail us from this fact that it does matter. Your life matters. Your choices matter. Your decisions matter. The way that you serve matters. How you spend your time matters. How you treat your family. All that really matters. Remember last week we talked about how there's a goal for God, for you. There's an end. There's a day that's coming. Remember, we talked about there's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's definitely going to be an end, a day of reckoning sometime in the future. It's coming. And last week, the author really pounded down the point. I want you to be ready. This is why we're making this decision. This is why we're committing to doing all this, because a day is coming, and I want you to be ready whenever that day comes. And I think he's really saying this to the church there in Hebrews, and I think he's really saying it to me and you. That a day is coming for you. A day is coming for all of us. So what you do does matter. How you spend your time does matter. What you stay committed to does really matter. There are consequences, both great and good and positive, but also and negative to our decisions. You have influence. You have influence. Not only are you influencing yourself by gathering truths and serving others that we talked about last week, but there's going to be a day when the people that you influence, a day is going to be coming for them as well. There's going to be a day for sons and daughters who you influence. There's going to be a day for husbands and wives who you influence, grandchildren who you influence, friends, neighbors, co-workers. All those people, there's going to be a day. And you have an opportunity to influence them. Guess what, guys? It matters. What you say matters. So let that propel you forward. Let that cause you to hold on to Jesus and not let go. I want you to think about these things as we read. Let's read verses 1 through 9. And I want you to see if you can catch this idea of the author saying to remember some things and to realize that your life matters. Okay, let's take a look at this text. I'm reading out of the New American Standard. We'll start in verse 1 of chapter 13. It says, Let love of the brethren continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by this some have entertained angels without knowing it. Remember the prisoners, as though in prison with them, and those who are ill-treated, since you yourselves also are in the body. Let marriage be held in honor among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled, for fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Let your character be free from the love of money, being content with what you have. For he himself has said, I will never desert you, nor will I ever forsake you. So that we confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What shall man do to me? Remember those who led you in the beginning, remember? When you first became a Christian. Remember those who led you, who spoke the word of God to you. And considering the result of their conduct, imitate their faith. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today, yes, and forever. I don't know if you remember this several weeks ago, we talked about this idea that there is Christ sitting next to God at the right hand of God, sanctifying people, speaking on our behalf forever, perpetually. We could draw one big long arrow all the way over here to chapter 13 where it says that right there. Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. That same Jesus is there, right? Verse 9, do not be carried away by varied and strange teachings, for it is good for the heart to be strengthened by grace, not by foods, through which those who were thus occupied were not benefited. Can you see it? Can you see it? He's saying, hey, listen, I don't want you to forget some things. I want you to remember to be about certain things. Have purpose, serve, look out for people. And the author is saying, I believe those things will keep you from stepping from side to side. Can you see that he's saying your life matters? So don't let go. So don't let go. In the next little section of text, we see some interesting things going on here. He's really talking this language, this sacrificial system language, so everybody back then continues to understand it. And it may be just a tad confusing. So as we read these next 3 or 4 verses, I want you to concentrate on the word outside. He mentions it 3 times in 4 verses. Outside. What's he saying about outside? Okay? Let's take a look starting in verse 10, and we'll read down through verse 13. We have an altar from which those who serve the tabernacle have no right to eat. Now let me stop right here. This is the part where he really gets to preaching, I think. He really just starts preaching it out there. There's a lot of symbolism, there's a lot of contrast in these 4 verses. The first thing he wants you to notice is this idea of the altar, right? He's making this comparison to the old covenant and what was being sacrificed there, the blood that was being shed, and Jesus being the altar today. Jesus being the altar of sacrifice, of shedding His blood. He is the altar, sitting at the right hand of God. When we realize that, it makes verse 10 a little more impactful. Let's read it again. We have an altar. Who does? Christ followers do. Who is it? It's Jesus at the right hand of God. All right? We have an altar from which those who serve the tabernacle have no right to eat. For the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the holy place by the high priest as an offering for sin are burned outside the camp. Therefore, Jesus also, that He might sanctify, remember we talked about sanctify several weeks ago, being cleansed so that we can be brought near to God, that He might sanctify the people through His own blood, suffered outside the gate. Hence, verse 13, let us go outside to Him. Let us go to Him outside the camp bearing His reproach. All right. The author here is totally being symbolic of inside and outside, okay? Jesus was sacrificed outside of the camp, all right? Jesus outside the camp symbolizing the new covenant, all right? The old covenant inside the camp. He's saying, I want you to go outside 3 times. 1, 2, 3, pow, 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 right? You can see him really preaching this. I want you to go outside the camp because that's where Jesus is. Wherever Jesus is, that's where I want you to go. Follow Him wherever He goes and don't let go. That's the message that He's preaching right there. That's the message that He's pounding the people. No matter where He goes, you go there too. Don't let go. I believe that's the big message that he's talking about right there. He is covering this message of doubt. Hebrew church, you're doubting. And so let me restore your faith in the confidence of Jesus. And that's the book of Hebrews. That's the whole purpose. That's what he's writing all about there. And so he starts at the very beginning. And he says, Jesus is greater than the angels. He's greater than the apostles. He's greater than Abraham. He's greater than the high priests. And as a high priest, he offers something that no other high priest does. He offers sanctification. He offers forgiveness of sins. He died once and for all, and no one else can do that. So the last question, the same question that's being asked as I ask, why would we turn back? Why would we go to anybody else when Jesus offers us this? That's it, gang. That's all I have for you this morning. I encourage you to keep reading, keep praying, keep wrestling with this, and keep growing in your faith. Thanks. We'll see you again soon.